Roman triumphal arches were one of the most culturally important ancient Roman structures, and for that reason, you're definitely going to need one in your Minecraft world. See, these arches were functionally pretty useless compared to other things such as aqueducts, baths, basilicas, and amphitheatres. However, triumphal arches justified their use in stone, being massive Roman propaganda billboards. In this video, I'm going to go through the key features of a Roman triumphal arch and show you how you can build one in your world to impose your empire on your neighbours. Roman triumphal arches were one of the most important cultural structures in the empire. They commemorated victories in war, new conquered territories, and the reigns of an emperor. These arches were built both inside and outside Roman-built and conquered cities on major logistical and processional routes, showing Roman power, victories, and influence to people as they went on their daily errands. In Rome, for example, they were along the Sacra Via, in the Roman Forum, and near major high-traffic space such as the Colosseum. Now, triumphal arches didn't follow a actual single rule to how they were built. We have many different examples, some of which I've built here, of how they deviate from rules and they don't particularly have a single rule in how they were built. So this example here, I've got a coloured version of the archway of Titus, and this is in Rome. So we have a coloured version here, and then we have a non-coloured version here, which is maybe more recognisable to what we have in the modern day. But typically, a lot of these buildings, or a lot of these archways, would have been coloured with various different colours, and they would have been painted to accentuate their details. In this example, we've got some Corinthian engaged columns that run into the wall here. We've got a main archway. We've got the attic area, or Atticus area, at the top of this, where most of the inscriptions would have been. And then we have bronze statues that top off the triumphal archway. Now, in this example, we have no colour. And in other examples, we would have had more archways. So this is a somewhat replica of the triumphal arch of Septimius Severus that is in the Roman Forum. So this had a single main central archway in the middle, as we can see here. And then it had two smaller archways on either side of this, with then again Corinthian engaged columns, a big area in the centre for inscriptions of the year and whatever they're trying to portray and what ruler they're commemorating, and then they have the bronze statues on top. Now in real life this one would have had 4 horses in front, but in Minecraft it's a bit difficult, so I've got 3 here. It keeps it centred. What it also had is it also had archways that ran between the individual passages themselves, so that also had another effect and another dimension to it, with then details in the ceiling. Now again, the archway of Septimius Severus would have been coloured in real life. This one I've just left as basically the diorite and the quartz with a bit of bronze or whatever copper on top, but you kind of get the idea of what's going on here. Now this archway here is similar to the archway of Septimius Severus, but this is the archway of Constantine. And this is somewhat resembling that archway that is present next to the Roman Colosseum in Rome. Again, it has the 3 archways, so it has the central larger archway, archways to the side, has Corinthian columns engaged into the wall here, and then it has statues on top with extra bits of inscription, and this example has more colour than the archway of Septimius Severus over here, with the differences is there are passageways that run between each of the archways themselves. So again, it's a similar structure, you kind of get the idea, but they change as they go up. This one is a slightly off-scale version of the Arc of Orange in France. So this again has 3 gateways through it, but then it has other types of classical elements. So we've got some sort of pediment structure, we've got different statues on top, we've got more setbacks, we've got more inscriptions. We've also got the same on the side of this. So in some of our other examples, it would have just had some flat inscribed, maybe a few statues on the side here, whereas this actually has Corinthian columns engaged into this side as well. And then again, we have something else here. So this is actually the archway of Septimius Severus, but in Leptis Magna in Libya. And this is what you would call a tetrapylon triumphal archway, where basically you have it situated at a crossroads and it looks slightly different. Now there are many different examples of archways sat at crossroads like this. This isn't what all of them look like, but this is what one of them looked like. It had Corinthian columns, it had these kind of inscriptions on top, it had these broken roof elements in it, and it looks quite interesting, but also it's built in maybe a more local characteristic material of Libya. Now here we can get into the meatier part of the video after explaining some of these elements. So what I quite like to do is I quite like to, when first making an archway, is I get maybe a picture, or if I have an idea of what I want to build, I start getting different colours of wool. So here what I do is that I've got the magenta wall at the bottom, and that's going to be our base. Then we have pink wall, that's designating our columns. We have cyan wall, that's designating our archway. And then we have various different bands and different elements in this. I'm not going to go into full detail about like what individual things are called, but this is the general rule I like to follow when building these archways. And this applies for all of these archways going across. What you'll find is that you'll find at the top of this, you have some sort of capital at the top of that. So typically these would have been Corinthian column capitals. You would have had also an element at the bottom here, and I'm going to talk on columns a little bit later. You would have had some sort of archway that might have been fully engaged to this column. It might not have been. It might have run down all the way like this. In this example here, something like that. So it could be all the way running down to the bottom of the floor there. You would also have statues at the top, and then you would have had a large area for inscription up here. So this is basically the general rule that you can maybe follow to help you set out your first triumphal archway in your Roman city. Now the next thing, looking at the actual archways themselves. Now this is actually much easier in 1.21 in Minecraft, where we have the shelf blocks. But for the sake of this video, I'm not going to be using the shelf blocks for many of the archways. It's a little bit simpler in this way. But what I quite like to do is I quite like to have it as my larger arches having a 7 wide gap here. So that gap there is 7 wide. Then I'd put 2 stairs going up like this, a slab, and then I put this iron trapdoor there. And that makes this nicer, somewhat arch-like shape. Same thing here, very, very simple. For my smaller arches on the side, I'll make it 3 wide, 1 stair, trapdoor, stair. Makes it quite easy. You could use shelves as well. I think shelves start to look better when they're much, much bigger. But in this example, it's quite easy to just do these 2 types of archways and just leave it at that, because you'll get a pretty good shape. The next thing that I'm going to have a look at is the actual block palette, and then the size and proportions of these things. So in terms of block palette, what I quite like to do is that if I'm building something that's stereotypically Roman and just looks completely blank-faced and white, I will use something like this. I'll use diorite, I'll use the polished diorite, quartz pillars, and then I'll use the pear like blanks. I'll add some other bits of quartz here and there with then these accent colors like this. So maybe we're looking at greens, like teal blues, yellows, and coppery colors, things like the granite and whatnot. And I think that looks quite nice. So when you have scenes like this where you may be having a sky with statues in it, that works quite well. You have these little detail elements where it may be gilded in gold, the inscriptions on the top gilded in gold. Then maybe you have some blue painted elements at the top of your Corinthian capitals, something like that. So you get a little bit more color into your building itself. Now in these examples, yes, you can just do this. It's technically more historically correct to use some more color in it. However, it's maybe more recognizable in the modern day to do something like this. So that's what I've done here with these 2 things, but you can maybe add some pops of color here and there. Now in terms of how I use these materials, what I quite like to do is I quite like to obviously use the quartz pillars as the pillars. In terms of the heavier elements that are maybe less inscribed, I'll use the polished diorite in these areas at the bottom and then towards the bands at the top. And then areas that may be inscribed with different statues or different inscriptions, I'll use this just bare diorite block because it has this extra different contrast into it. It looks a bit more mosaic-like and a bit more inscribed. Then as I come to the top, at the Atticus area, I'll then use the quartz pillars again because it looks like it's inscribed again with there maybe some buttons and signs on top. Maybe add some fence gates to add just some little dentils or whatnot into the top of this archway, and you kind of get the point. The materials are layered on top of each other, and you get this nice layered effect where it designates between these bordered features like this with the polished diorite stairs and slabs, and then you get the nice diorite normal blocks like that, as you can see there. Now I'm going to talk very, very quickly about Corinthian columns and engaged Corinthian columns. So engaged Corinthian columns were a very, very characteristic part of Roman triumphal arches, and they're one of the main ornamental elements that you see in them. So what I quite like to do is I quite like to just keep it very, very simple, make it all the time 1 block wide, like this, and just build it up with a quartz pillar. Maybe I'll add some shelves at the bottom. So in this example, I've got some pear oak shelves, and I'll put it on the back of something that's 3 wide here. So as you can see on this example, you can see it's engaged because it's then got the blocks either side and it's not really blocked off. Now that's not true in all the cases. I mean, in some cases I've just done it like this where you can't really see it, but I think the Arch of Titus in real life, you don't really see the bits either side so much, so it kind of works. But in most cases I've been using this where it's 3 wide, and then you have this Corinthian column that runs up to the top. So we're using shelves here. As I get to the top, what I like to use a sign to basically form this band at the bottom, using tripwire hooks, then again another pear-like shelf, or you could actually use fence gates here as well that are just knocked inwards. And then at the top of it, you have your polished diorite stairs. So this is something that you can use across all of your different builds. You don't have to just use this in, your triumphal arches. You could use this in Roman temples, Roman basilicas, even in your houses, villas, etc. This is actually a really, really nice design that looks pretty much like a Corinthian capital would have looked like back in the Roman period. Now finally, I'm going to finish off this video by talking about the actual placement of some of these arches and where you're going to want to put them in your Roman cities. So in this example here, this is actually a Hellenistic Greek city, so this isn't actually planned out like a proper Roman city would have been. But I've imagined in this example that this has been conquered by the Romans. This is now part of the Roman Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire as such. And here you go, you have a big triumphal arch out the front of your city, which is designating the threshold on this major public way to the city gate, but also out towards farms way over somewhere over here, as you can see. So where you're going to want to put them is you're going to want to put your triumphal arches on major public routes, but also routes into your city forum. So basically where people can see it, where the empire can spread its propaganda the best, that's where you're going to want to put your triumphal arch. So major routes like this, in this city, major roads, in forums, so you can see a little one over there by the temple, and then even in places like, in the middle of a road between two cities, or in the middle of a farming region, or things like that, where you're gonna say, okay, where am I going to maximize my propaganda abilities for people to pass through this and then be able to see the glory and victory of the empire. So there you go, guys. That was my guide to Roman triumphal arches. Really hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I'm going to do a tutorial of one of these structures in the future, maybe in the next few weeks or so. But make sure to like and subscribe, and until the next one, goodbye.